Hello and welcome to Hot and Heavy, the Elaine podcast. I'm your host, Shivani Desai. Today I'll be talking about Season 3, Episode 16, The Fix-Up. Hello everyone, and happy Festivus! Well, okay, so I'm recording this on Festivus 2021, releasing it tomorrow, so Christmas Eve, so I'm wishing you a belated happy Festivus. And, well, I hope that you've aired your grievances and told the people you have a problem with how you feel. And I hope that you were the victor in all of the feats of strength. Because we all know, to the victor belong the spoils. Oh, well, the kids have been home for almost a week now, and it's been great. They kind of keep to themselves when their screen time is up. I do have a schedule for their screen time because if I didn't, they would be zombies. And I know a lot of you parents out there can relate. I'm really trying to avoid losing my kids to their screens. I mean, it's inevitable. It's this struggle of not wanting to keep them from, knowing technology and the things that their friends are into. I don't want them to be the odd ones out. But at the same time, we knew, giving them those iPads came with a price, and that price being obsession with being on their screens. So, we've done our best to limit the screen time and make sure they're doing some physical activity every day. Well, whatever. We do our best as parents. Some days are better than others. No judgment to anyone who wants to let their kids be on the screen so that they can get their work done or have some peace or whatever it is. Every generation, I think, had the distraction that annoyed their parents. With us, me and my brother in particular, it was TV. My parents hated that we loved TV so much and would always try and get up, get out, do something else. But, which we did. I mean, I know that I also loved just being alone in my room, and I had no screens in my room. I just had the radio and mirrors where I would make dumb faces or reenact movies or shows or actresses or actors that I liked, try to do impressions. So, there was that. But now, with the mobility of screens, my kids are in their rooms, but they're on a screen. So, yeah, it's always that kind of struggle. But one of the activities that I had planned for me and the kids was to build a gingerbread house, and they were very excited about it. We just got one of those kits from Target. I mean, we were in the holiday section. There was just a whole display of all the, those little kits that they have, fully aware that this might not be the best quality, but it's just more about spending time together and doing a fun activity. And they were really pumped about it. So we got the kit a couple of weeks ago, and then I said, well, we'll do this over break. Well, we did it. And wow, do we suck at that? I was terrible at it. I followed the instructions. I thought I was doing well. Oh my gosh, we had to rebuild it a couple of times. Things just kept falling over or sliding down. Ultimately, we just kind of laughed and said, you know what? We're not entering this into any competition. I'm not on British baking show or anything like that. So it's just for us and it's just for fun. So we built the best gingerbread house we could. It was not very pretty, but we didn't care. I love having my kids home. I really enjoy their company. They're still at the age where they like spending time with their mom and dad. So we are treasuring that for the moment. All right, so let's get into the episode. The synopsis from my coffee table book is as follows. Jerry and Elaine set George up with Elaine's friend, Cynthia. They hit it off, but George is horrified to discover that a condom Kramer had given him was defective. This episode was written by Elaine Pope and Larry Charles. So some different writers than we've seen for a while. Larry Charles has, written a few, but this is a co-written episode by Elaine Pope and Larry Charles. Elaine Pope being one of the few female writers on staff at that point. So it's pretty cool. And it definitely reflects in this episode. And this was another VHS taped episode of mine that I've watched this so many times this episode, and it really is, spoiler alert, a big favorite of mine. All right, so we start out in a couple restaurants. These scenes kind of go back and forth between Jerry and George and Elaine and Cynthia. But we start with Jerry and George. They're having dinner. And George says he'll never meet anyone. Says, you can't even meet a woman you dislike, much less like. And he says, well, why must it be so difficult? Why can't I just walk up to a woman and say hi? Well, he gets the opportunity. A beautiful woman walks by, and he can barely even say it. Then we switch to Elaine and Cynthia. They're having dinner. And, well, first I want to mention that Cynthia is played by Maggie Wheeler. And I think many of us know her as Janice from Friends. I think that's definitely one of her best known characters. And Janice was one of Chandler's girlfriends, kind of an on-again, off-again relationship. And I do want to mention she had a fantastic guest starring role on Curb many years ago. She played a character who, instead of laughing at something, she would say, LOL. Larry, LOL, she would say to him. It was so great. And it annoyed Susie so much that she enlisted Larry. She's like, Larry, you got to talk to her. You got to, it's horrible. She just says, LOL. Why can't she just laugh? And that kind of reminds me of the woman that Jerry dates way later in Seinfeld that doesn't laugh either. And she just says, that's funny. But anyway, yeah, that's another great Maggie Wheeler performance. LOL. Not a big surprise. She's worked steadily since the 80s till now. She's still working and has a lot of projects in the works, according to her IMDb, which if you've listened before, that's as deep as I go with my research. And I love her in this episode. In fact, I knew her from this episode before anything else. So when I saw her on Friends appear as Janice for the first time, I was like, oh, that's the Cynthia woman from Seinfeld. And yeah, I mean, she clearly has a very different vibe here. You know, we know she doesn't really act like Janice in real life. So it's always nice to revisit this episode after seeing her as Janice, because it's just such a more grounded and, you know, very realistic character compared to that. She's such a great character actress, and I think she does such a wonderful job in this episode. And she really gets to shine in this opening scene in particular with such amazing quality dialogue and subtle comedy. You know, it's not over the top, but it's just, most of it is just in what she's saying that's incredibly funny. And Julia Louis-Dreyfus is almost the straight person, the straight partner to this, you know. I try not to say straight man because it's very, you know, not inclusive of another gender. So, yeah, she's the straight partner, I guess I'll say, to Cynthia here. And I sort of love that. So anyway, to get back to the scene, Cynthia is kind of echoing what George is going through, saying there's no good guys out there. I mean, the good ones, they know they're good. They're in such demand. They don't want to commit to one person. And Elaine says, I hate the good ones. Was Jerry one of the good ones? That's a good question. I think he thinks he is. Such a great response. Well, then the mediocre ones are available, but they're so insecure about not being one of the good ones that they're always saying, oh, I'm not good enough for you. What are you doing with me? And eventually I say, you're right. I really could just quote every single line from these opening scenes, but I will spare you that. But I love that one so much. Elaine suggests, well, maybe you need someone between good and mediocre. She says, no. I think I need someone who is just so desperate that they appreciate being with me. And great cut to George. Eating like a slob, you know, food or sauce all over his face. And so he says it's gotten to the point where he's flirting with operators over the phone. And he almost made a date with one. And so Jerry says, well, look, that's hope. I don't want hope. Hope is killing me. My dream is to become hopeless. When you're hopeless, you don't care. And when you don't care, that in turn makes you attractive. So hopelessness is the key. It's my only hope. Okay, sorry. I know I just quoted the entire run there, but again, these are just such great lines of dialogue. Back to Elaine and Cynthia. Cynthia feels badly for her mother, ultimately. You know, this is more about the fact that her mother has to see this, and if she wasn't around, it wouldn't be so bad. But if she is not married by the time she's 40, she has no choice. She's going to just have to kill her mother. It's the only fair thing to do. That's sort of where Elaine's like, well, okay. Well, at least you're not bitter. Well, who says I'm not bitter? Aren't you too young to be bitter? No, you can be young and bitter. Anyway, she is bitter. Tells Elaine not to tell anyone. Then she says, order me a piece of cake. I'm going to go throw up. Some, you know, bulimia humor there. not really a humorous topic, but, 1991, they could joke about it. The purpose of these opening scenes is just to set up the entire premise of this episode. George is lonely. Cynthia is bitter. They both can't find someone. And Jerry and Elaine are the sounding boards for their venting. And so that kind of gives us the foundation of what these characters, well, we know what George is about, but what Cynthia is about as well. And my take, like I said, this is a VHS episode for me. So I've watched and studied and pretty much memorized, as you can tell from, my recounting of the dialogue. I was so in love with this episode when it first came out, and I still am. And this is easily one of the best setup scenes of the entire series. I love how it's structured, where we switch back and forth between the conversation between the men and the women. It's sort of a real-time visual compare and contrast. I just absolutely love that. I think it's really very intelligently done. One thing the show does so well is comment on how men and women see the world of dating so differently, at least at that time. We're talking about 30 years ago. And right from the start, it's clear that each point of view was written by the writer of that gender. So Elaine Pope, her voice is coming through Cynthia, and Larry Charles's voice is coming through George. And I love that. And that just how effective that is. And that just goes to show it matters to have representation when you're creating something. Like this episode is very men and women dating each other. So it sort of matters to have those very gender specific voices. And I should say straight gender specific voices. So I think that this shines in this episode because, again, it's very focused on the difference between how men and women feel about dating. So the fact that there was a combination of writers, a man and a woman, writing about this, fantastic. I love that both George and Cynthia are equally frustrated and annoyed, but they have such different ways of approaching it. Like George has this, I just want to be hopeless. And Cynthia thinks that maybe settling for a desperate man is a way to go. And I also appreciate Cynthia's concern for her mother, while that's not even a thought for George. That's a very, I think, female-centric thing to think about. What are other people going to think, especially my mom. And that's always something that I think a lot of us females can relate to. A lot of us have mothers who are pressuring us. I know I felt the pressure from my mom. One thing about this scene that has always fascinated me is the way that Cynthia eats. I believe she's dabbing like small amounts of dressing onto a piece of lettuce and just biting it. We clearly find out she has some issues with eating, but every time I watch this episode, I'm so amused by how she's eating that lettuce, just like little dabs of dressing, and it's so weird. And I wish there was some commentary about this, but I couldn't find any. I wonder if it was Maggie Wheeler's choice, or was it directed this way in the script that she has this odd way of eating? My gut says that it was probably scripted that way, but why? Why was this added to Cynthia's character as like a quirk of hers? But we'll never know, I guess. This whole opener with both of these scenes switching back and forth, it just feels like such natural conversations. And that's the best part about it for me. Casual meals with friends and discussing what they're going through and finding the funny in that situation. It's done so well. All right, next we're in Jerry's apartment. Elaine's on the couch reading the paper. Jerry's at his table reading the paper, and he says his hands are filthy from the paper and he needs a wet nap like those rib joints. Then they start talking about what they did the night before and say, oh, dinner with George, dinner with Cynthia. They both find out that George and Cynthia are really given up. They just can't find anybody. And they seem to have the same thought at the same time. And they say, yeah, right. I've never fixed anybody up. Neither have I. And I'm not about to start with George. That irks Jerry. Well, why not? Why wouldn't you start with George? Is she too good for him? I didn't say too good. Well, you implied it. And then they both go into why their respective friend is awesome and how the other person would be lucky. She asks Jerry, well, you don't think she's beautiful? I don't know. What's with the eyebrows? And she says, you know what your problem is? Your standards are too high. I went out with you. Well, that's because my standards are too low. I know that's one of like the famous quotes from this episode and from the series. I honestly don't think it's that great of a comeback from either of them, but that's just me. And then Elaine can't let this go. By the way, women kill for eyebrows like that. Do you know that? And she explains to Jerry, Women pluck their real eyebrows out of their heads until they're bald above the eyes, and then they paint in these eyebrows to look like that. Well, Jerry says, well, you know what? George is fast. He's strong. He can bait a hook. And then it's Jerry. He's like, come on, let's do this. She's like, what, are you into this? Yeah, it's a good match. Then they discuss it and they say, full disclosure, that's our agreement. We tell each other everything. Purpose of the scene, we see the idea for this whole fix-up materialize. And my favorite thing about this scene is how passionately Jerry and Elaine are in the corner of their friends, of both George and Cynthia. I mean, both most certainly have critical opinions about their friends, but they aren't about to admit that in this forum. You know, they are both defending their friend as much as possible. So I love that. I think that's actually a really endearing thing about each character here. Some fantastic JLD physicality on display with the whole eyebrow explanation. I love it. The face Jerry makes as well when she says, one by one, and he kind of shudders. I like that. And I couldn't help but think, if Jerry had an issue with Cynthia's eyebrows 30 years ago, which her eyebrows just look normal to me, they might be a little thicker than what was in fashion then. I can only imagine what Jerry today thinks about the trend of eyebrows and the styling of eyebrows right now. I mean, it's a whole new level of painting them in. It baffles my husband. I know there's been many instances where we've been out in public and it's a younger woman who clearly has done a lot of YouTube tutorials, is very into makeup, and their eyebrows are, I mean, talk about Uncle Leo magic marker eyebrows, some of them. And yeah, my husband will just be like, look, I guess I just don't know, but like, is that what they mean it to look like? It makes me laugh. I'm not a fan. Look, but then again, I'm an old lady. So I have a feeling these eyebrows are going to be the thing. We all have our things where we look back and we're like, oh God, what were we thinking? So for me, it's like my perm stage, and then I did the Rachel do, like not good. So I have a feeling the eyebrows of today are going to be what these young people will look back on and be like, oh my God, my dumb eyebrows. My prediction made it here, folks. You're the first to hear it. And the whole eyebrow thing, I mean, it's another true to life characteristic touched upon in this episode. Women's obsession with their eyebrows. I mean, this isn't anything new. I'm talking about the trend right now with eyebrows, but eyebrows are just in general something that us women think about a lot. And I was so fortunate because my mother was a cosmetologist and an esthetician for over 30 years. And my eyebrows were groomed as early as like 9th or 10th grade. And so I avoided this like awkward I mean, not that I avoided the entire awkward stage, but at least with my facial hair, my mom, she took charge. She helped me so much because look, I'm an Indian woman. So around puberty, a lot of us Indian kids, this facial hair issue, it can take over a little bit. So I feel so thankful to my mother that she was like, all right, we're taking care of this. We waxed my upper lip, shaped my eyebrows so that it just wasn't out of control. So yeah, I'm really thankful that my mother just kind of took charge with that. And not that I completely avoided being bullied or having an awkward stage. Like I said, I still had perms and whatnot, but like it was certainly a lot better than it could have been if I was just walking around with a mustache and really bushy eyebrows. And just for me personally, it was always something. Eyebrows was something I always noticed on women. The thickness of their eyebrows, the arch. The arch was a big thing. And there was a time in the 90s when I was going for the Jennifer Aniston and Courtney Cox looks. It was when Friends blew up. And they were like beauty icons. They certainly were on every magazine cover. So I ate that up. My mom noticed beyond her work, of shaping my eyebrows, I would take a tweezer and really try and get a higher arch and a little thinned out at the edges. And my mom, she's like, if you keep doing that and thin it out, that hair may not grow back and you'll be stuck with these really pencil thin eyebrows. And believe me, you don't want that. They may not grow back the same. So I listened. One of the few times I wasn't such a stubborn little bitch as a teenager, and I actually did listen to my mom, and I was like, fine. I like that it's Jerry who gets giddy about the idea first of this fix-up. And Elaine's the one that's like, really? Are you into this? She's doubtful, but you see a rare side of Jerry, almost like a hopeful romantic side to him. So I really liked that they included that for him in this scene. The next scenes, I guess we can say, this is the asking George and Cynthia about the fix-up, and we're doing another back and forth like we did in the opening scenes. George just says right off the bat, out of the question. It's one step away from personal ads, prostitutes. No way. He's not going to do it. And he emerges from Jerry's bedroom and says, what does she look like? And she's good looking. Good body. Really very nice and good. Good personality. She's smart, funny. I don't want anyone smarter than me. How could she be smarter than you? Oh yeah, what does she do? We switch to Cynthia. First of all, what does he do? Well, he was in real estate. He's not working right now. Oh, he's not working? Elaine has to explain. He tried to poison his boss. What? Is he nuts? No, he's a funny guy. What does he look like? Pardon? Well, he's got a lot of character in his face. He's short, stocky, well, fat, right? Well, he's powerful. He can lift 100 pounds over his head. She remembered what Jerry said. Oh, yeah. What else? He's just kind of losing his hair. He's bald? No, he's balding. So he will be bald. Then we go back to George. What about the hair? Long, dark, flowing hair. He likes flowing, cascading hair. It's very important to George. Thick, lustrous hair. It's very important. Jerry just has to clarify. Is that what you said? Yeah, that's right. Now, George also needs to know, if you put your hand in the hair, is it easy to get it out? Well, do you want to be able to get it out, or do you want to not be able to get it out? I'd like to be able to get it out. I think you'll get it out. What about the skin? He likes a good cheek. She's got a fine cheek. A rosy glow, a pinkish hue. There's a hue. And Jerry, you can tell he just thought about it because Elaine mentioned it. Well, she got great eyebrows. Who cares about eyebrows? Is she sweet? I like sweet, but not too sweet. You could throw up from that. I don't think you'll throw up. She likes to throw up. We got our second bulimia joke. We go back to Cynthia, and she asks, has he ever been married? Has he ever been close? I love that Elaine's response is, he once spent a weekend with a woman. That's as close as he's gotten. He didn't really try to poison his boss. Yeah, he did. The purpose of the scene, this is the presentation of the fix-up to George and Cynthia. My take, I don't think this back and forth scene between the pairs could be more perfect. Everything from the dialogue to the places where they cut back and forth to the performances, flawless in my eyes. And again, I could really go line by line, but dear listener, I will spare you that as much as I can. Sometimes when I get going, I can't stop. I will admit that, and I'm sorry. I'll try and edit it out, but it's hard. Here are some highlights. I am making an effort to not just reenact the entire scene for you. I love the cut to Cynthia with the what does he do question as her first question after hearing George peppered Jerry with about 75 questions about her looks before he got to that question. So it's just, again, such a great illustration of where the priorities are between this man and then this woman. I also love Elaine's entire description of George because she is truthful about everything and is trying to spin it so positively. There's no real lying in there. And also, I just need to talk about JLD's performance. Another display of just physical mastery. Not one line of dialogue that she says is just stated with her voice. Every line is said with her entire body. And I've said it before. I mean, that's what physicality means to me. It's just, and it doesn't have to be something big and over the top. It can be a little bit of a shift of a shoulder or just a flick of an eyebrow or something. But there's always some physicality she's matching with her line of dialogue. And she does it in a way that's, not over the top or unrealistic. It's just a perfect amount of energy assigned while she's being completely believable, and just brilliant choices all around by JLD. her little movements, I love it. When she does character in his face, she does that little motion thing. Short, she swings her hand out to show that he's short. Stocky, the sort of little huggy movement she does to herself. I mean, saying these out loud to describe them sounds a little ridiculous, but she just pulls it off so well. And I always notice this with JLD. Every performance, not only in Seinfeld, every other thing she's done, she adds, little movements to her performance all the time, and it just enhances everything she does. It's so obvious sometimes when you see actors that are very stagnant or they don't really use their body. And it's not maybe necessarily a bad performance, but what I'm saying here for someone like JLD, I always pick those things out because they are, she knows that perfect level to assign with her body as she's saying a line of dialogue that just, it just adds so much to it. And it could be just the smallest movement. And that's what makes her so brilliant. With George, I love that thick, lustrous hair, that moment. What a fantastic performance by Jason Alexander. And again, I'm giving JLD all this praise, but Jason Alexander is another fantastic physical performer. Just the fact that he kind of, wipes his nose with his finger and he's petting his own balding head. It's just so great. And even Jerry Seinfeld's performance where he just kind of has to pause and he looks up at him rubbing his head, and it's great. And George is so serious and doesn't at all see the irony in what he just said. That's just so great. Played very well. So it was all great, but those were the highlights for me. And I really appreciate also the gradual acceptance by both George and Cynthia to the idea of the fix-up. They both go through, different emotions and reactions for very different reasons. But by the end, they are both kind of reluctantly convinced to do this. Again, I just don't think you could get a more perfect scene in any sitcom. It's so funny because of all the truth in the situation. So well done. We go to the next scene. It's back in Jerry's apartment. George is on cloud nine. He had a great phone conversation with Cynthia. Loves her voice. The one thing he didn't ask about and the one thing Jerry didn't mention, it's mellifluous, which means pleasing to the ear. I had to look that up. I could intimate what it meant, but I just wanted to know, exactly what it meant. But yeah, it just means a sound that's pleasing to the ear. And yeah, George is just feeling so. He didn't even need his notes on this conversation. I mean, and she had to be impressed. Elaine enters. Hey, they're so excited. So, Saturday night. So, what did she say? She said you're getting together Saturday night. That's it? She had mentioned the conversation? No. Well, see, I don't get that. What? She could have mentioned the conversation. Immediately, George sours. Okay, fine. I'll go on the date, but that's it. In walks Kramer. He's a bag of condoms from Bob Sacamano. He just got a job at a condom factory. Gave Kramer a gross. Jerry says they look like they came out of a cereal box. Come on, Elaine, take half a bag. What am I, a hooker? They look kind of cheap. George says, I'll take one. He grabs a blue one out of the pile. It's possible. The purpose of this scene, we see the advancement of the A story, the fix-up. George and Cynthia have spoken, and Kramer finally appears with his condom storyline. My take, this is such a full display of George's neuroses here. I mean, on cloud nine about how well the phone conversation went, and then just turns on an instant when Elaine says that Cynthia didn't mention the conversation. And I honestly, I see George's point here. If it was such a fantastic conversation, they spoke forever, it was back and forth and everything was just clicking. I do think it's a little weird that she wouldn't say something to Elaine about it. I think I would be in my head about that as well, just like George. So I can completely see his point here. I always love JLD's no, with that big smile on her face when George asks if Cynthia mentioned the conversation. Just love that moment. Kramer's plot. It's very sort of hamstrung into this episode. In the notes about nothing, they do mention there was more to it, where apparently the condom company fires Bob Sacamano because they found out he gave away all these condoms. And then that would have led to Kramer suing the company. I think that's probably A, too convoluted, and B, there's so much gold with the A story that, sorry, Kramer, but sacrificing a Kramer plot was sort of worth it. Whoever was in charge in the prop department here with those condoms did a great job. They do look so cheap. I mean, these clear plastic wrappers, they look like the top of like those really cheap lollipops. So just a shout out to the prop department. Really good job with that. All right, moving on. Jerry and Elaine are on a phone call. It's the night of the date, so they're wondering where they are. It's kind of late. But then Jerry gets call waiting. It is George. And then during that same time, Elaine gets a call from Cynthia. All right, call me back when you're done talking. Remember our pact. Full disclosure. Then we go to Jerry and George's conversation. And George laying on his bed in that robe. Could we have picked maybe a different look there? I think so. Anyway, he says to Jerry, look, I'm going to tell you. We swore we wouldn't tell you or Elaine. Jerry says he'll put it in the vault. Don't worry about it. They had sex. I closed my eyes and I made a move. She didn't stay over. No, she went home. Don't mention this to Elaine. Cut to Elaine and Cynthia. Well, Cynthia's told Elaine. Neither of them are keeping this pact to each other. And she says they did it in the kitchen because he said it's the most sociable room in the house. Elaine asks, well, how was it? How good could it be? My head was on a hot plate. Why does George have a hot plate? Doesn't he have a full kitchen? Apparently not. And then Elaine hears her call waiting, and that must be Jerry. Well, don't you tell him any of this. And Jerry and Elaine sort of have this stilted conversation. They say nothing about the sex that occurred, and they just said they had a good time. The purpose of this scene, moving the plot along, George and Cynthia's date night, Jerry and Elaine waiting impatiently to see how it went. My take, again, I like the back and forth here. We're seeing this kind of runner of a device with the switching. I think it's very effective. I do wish we got more detail from each of them. I mean, similar to the earlier scene where George and Cynthia were asking about each other, with Jerry and Elaine. I just wish there was more detail here. We get the kitchen detail with the head on the hot plate, but that's pretty much it. Now, in the notes about nothing, they do mention that Cynthia did have more lines in an earlier version of the script about how gross it was to have sex with George. There was grunting and he made gurgling sounds. He flails his arms and legs. Oh my God, it just, the examples they put in the notes about nothing made it sound really bad. Then the scene, I guess the whole scene just felt too short, but it's still effective. I think the main purpose is that Jerry and Elaine each know about the sex without telling each other about it. The whole full disclosure thing kind of went out the window and they abandoned it in allegiance to their friend. So that's what we see. Next, we're back in Jerry's apartment. George is upset. It's been 3 days. He's left her messages. She hasn't returned one call. He feels cheap and violated. She used me, Jerry. Jerry's pretty upset. And he wants to do something, just sitting there. Wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, or sir, whatever. And George is racking his brain. I was smart. I was funny. I made great small talk with the waitress so she could see I'm a man of the people. Jerry, he's quietly fuming. He says, you know what? I'm going to call her. No, Jerry, you can't do that. No, I'm going to call her. George, I'm calling her. They freak out, both of them. George says, it's none of your business. And Kramer comes in and has to break up the fight. Kramer says, this is over a woman, isn't it? And he just kind of talks them down, even though he's totally off on what it's about. And then Kramer remembers, he mentions, don't use those condoms, they're defective. George charges at Kramer because, well, he used that blue condom. How could you give me a defective condom? I didn't think you were going to use it. What do you mean you didn't think I was going to use it? And Jerry has to step between them to break it up. Jerry says to George, don't worry. If anything was wrong, she would have called you. And we cut to Elaine's apartment. Cynthia's missed her period. She's very worried. She's never late. And Elaine's just like, oh my God, but he used a condom. I know, but these things aren't always foolproof. Oh no. What? Was it blue? Yeah. How'd you know? Just a hunch. Purpose of this scene, Cynthia missed her period, and it could be all Kramer's fault. My take, super short scene between Elaine and Cynthia, but I like both of their performances here, especially when Elaine asks, was it blue? The realization to me where she says, oh no, it's always funny. And ladies, I think we've all been here. We've all had these panic moments and needing our friends to talk us down or just to help us vent about it, right? Yeah, I think we've all been there. We move on to the next scene. Jerry's fighting with a soda bottle. Twist off! Twist off! Elaine kind of witnesses this as she enters. Oh, hi. Soda? Jerry can't even help it. He just starts right in. "Hey, what's with your flaky friend? She doesn't return phone calls?" "Who are you to talk about her like that? She'll call him when she's good and ready." Jerry's so pissed. He will not let this go. "I told you we shouldn't have done this. It was a bad idea." She says, "You told me. You pushed this whole thing on me," while pushing him in the back. "I was just trying to help your bitter, twisted friend." "Oh, she's not bitter." Elaine says, "Besides, I was doing you a favor." "Wait, you said they had a good time. Is there something you're keeping from me? Are you calling me a liar?" They get in each other's face. First, their fingers are in their faces, and then they just start fighting. Kramer once again has to break it up. "Don't you two see that you're in love with each other?" Once again, Kramer's completely off about why they're fighting. But he tells them, everything you dream of is right here in front of you. "Oh, by the way, Jerry, give these to George. These condoms will work." "I knew those condoms were defective." "How did you know they were defective?" Because she missed her period." George happens to hear Elaine say that. Missed a period? He is excited. Oh my gosh, he's a father. My boys can swim. He runs off. Just so excited, so thrilled. Purpose of the scene, we're seeing the fallout between Jerry and Elaine. Their power trip of, the fix-up, it's backfiring. And then George thinks he's a father at the end. My take, I like the argument here between Jerry and Elaine. I think that's really believable. Jerry coming in so hot, immediately putting Elaine on the defensive. I think it's great. Another display of how determined they both are to defend their respective friend. The whole Jerry struggling with the soda bottle is very random and odd, but I like it. We don't get to see Jerry Seinfeld in these types of kind of sillier moments, so I actually always enjoy it. Kramer having to break up yet another fight. It's silly. I don't really love the whole fighting and Kramer breaking it up thing, but it's the runner for Kramer. He has very little to do, very little to contribute in this episode, so I forgive it. He does it well. It's not that I don't like his performance. I do like the Kramer speech, though, about Jerry and Elaine being in love with each other. I guess in a way we find out Kramer's real feelings about them as a couple, and I don't know, it's kind of oddly romantic. I kind of appreciate that. The delivery, I kind of did my impression of it. Again, I know I'm really quoting so much here, but it's just because I love the dialogue so much. But I do love her delivery of the because she missed her period. She sounds like a frustrated 4-year-old. I love it. And George's reaction has always struck me as, very sweet. It's a little unexpected. And I like that he's excited that his boys can swim. Next, we're at the last scene of the episode, another restaurant, and Elaine and Cynthia are sitting alone. They're waiting on George and Jerry. Cynthia is explaining how George told her, no matter what happens, he's going to be supportive and, will do whatever he needs. And she was blown away. She was speechless. And even Elaine is like, wow. And she explained, well, I just got my period. And, Jerry and George arrive. Well, Jerry is limping to the table. Whoa, what happened? Acting. Very mature. And Jerry says, well, quite a table you got here. Oh, best seat in the house, right next to the kitchen. Oh, stop it. The women have ordered some appetizers and start eating. George is excited. He looks very hungry. And all his sloppiness and disgusting eating habits are on display. And from the looks of her face, Cynthia is very grossed out. Purpose of the scene, we're just kind of resolving everything with the fix-up, kind of ending on what I think we can all conclude Cynthia being very grossed out and probably breaking up with George soon after this. And my take, I like that it all ends in a restaurant all together, kind of taking the separate pairs from the opening scenes and combining them at the end. It's a nice touch. And there's not a ton of comedy here except for the very end, but I appreciate the grounded conversation between Cynthia and Elaine. I so appreciate periods being discussed so openly in a sitcom. Even saying the word period was pretty rare back then. So to just put it out there without a hint of it being inappropriate or taboo, or it's just put out there and it's just adults living through realistic situations where, women have periods. Oh my gosh, let's acknowledge it. I think I remember an episode of The Cosby Show where Rudy gets her period, and I don't believe they say the word period the entire episode. I think they say something like the change or the transition, or I think they may say it once, but it felt very like, okay, well, we'll give you one period, like the censors said that, and like, but after that, we can't keep saying it, And granted, it's a very different audience for The Cosby Show versus a show like Seinfeld. I get it, but I was pretty young watching this, and I just really appreciated the fact that it wasn't presented, the fact that we were talking about a period wasn't presented with anything except just a fact about a woman. I do have to point this out, and it was actually mentioned as a goof on the IMDb page for this episode. The timing of all of this doesn't really add up. I mean, Cynthia missing her period, it's a bit too soon after she and George have sex. And also, when she says missed, does she mean she missed her entire period, or does she mean that she's late? It's not very clear. It's not a huge deal, but the timing just doesn't make a lot of sense, but I'm not letting it ruin my enjoyment of this episode. George being a slob while eating is a funny way to cap the episode. I think it was, they kind of needed something to end on a funny note. And this is something we also see in the beginning of the episode with the way George is eating. And it really becomes a runner for George in the entire series. It's just, did you see the way he eats? Yeah, he's disgusting. But I really couldn't help but wonder, didn't Cynthia see him eat already on their date? I mean, I guess maybe he's very careful on a first date to be a very neat eater. But it almost seems like he's unaware of how gross he eats. So I don't know if that would be true. Anyway, it's, again, not an important point, but it just seemed like a missed detail. Like, they've already been to dinner, so I don't know why all of a sudden Cynthia would be turned off by this. Okay, so let's take a quick break, and I will see you on the other side. You've dated the good ones. You've dated the mediocre ones. But where do you find yourself over and over again? Single. So maybe it's time to change your approach. Get ready to find everything you've dreamed of with Pathetic Partners, a new dating service that matches you with a partner who has nothing and will just appreciate being with you. Remember those ex-partners who pushed their interests on you? You were forced to watch a bunch of Wes Anderson movies or spent your precious weekends at Topgolf? When you are matched with a pathetic partner, you won't have to worry about any of those horrifying experiences because your match will have no interests and is perfectly willing to do whatever you want to do. Oh, and the awful task of getting your partner's friends to like you? I mean, how many "that's what she said" jokes can one person take? How long can you pretend to be interested in the design of a she shed? The advantage of a pathetic partner is there are no friends to worry about. Just contact us at Pathetic Partners by calling 555-LOSER. And within days, you will be matched with your pathetic partner. Happiness is in your future, and it requires zero effort or compromise. You just need to exist. Pathetic Partners. Who knew desperation could be so sexy? And we're back. In the inside look, Larry Charles said that he and Elaine Pope had experienced this very thing. They were the Elaine and Jerry of the situation where they had fixed up friends in real life, and it worked really nicely at first, and they thought they were geniuses, and oh my gosh, we made such a great match. And then things started to go badly, and Larry said that he and Elaine blamed each other, and it kind of created a little rift between them. And they thought, well, this is actually a really great premise for a show. And they wrote it in only like a day or two. It just came out so easily. And this episode actually won an Emmy for Best Writing in a Comedy Series. And pretty cool, they showed a clip. Jerry presented them with the award. And they did a funny bit where Larry Charles wrote the speech for Jerry to deliver. So it was actually really cute. And the notes about nothing. So JLD is pregnant in this episode. So a lot of shots to hide her pregnancy from this point on in the season. And you can see in this episode, she's wearing a lot of loose fitting clothing. And, you know, she's definitely sitting down more, or things are blocking her stomach. So yeah, I've always noticed that too about this episode and beyond in season 3. There were a couple of quotes that I really liked during the Notes About Nothing. And Larry David said this on creating Seinfeld. He said that he and Jerry didn't watch a lot of sitcoms. So he thought that was really to their advantage. They weren't following any sort of formulas that they had seen or understand, what they were supposed to be writing towards because they just didn't really know. And they just followed their own sensibilities, which, that just all makes so much sense, right? Like, that's why it felt so different. And another little blip from Jerry that I liked, he said, they never change the situation for the comedy. They find the comedy in the truth of the situation. So simple, but works very well. All right, moving on to Contributor Corner. Greg contributed this week. He said he's in Florida spending the holidays with his family, but he said I couldn't not contribute. So I really appreciate him making the time. So this is what Greg had to say. My favorite thing about this episode in general is how it shows both sides of this fix-up in terms of Elaine talking to her friend Cynthia and Jerry talking with George. But the best part is how Jerry and Elaine discuss this fix-up when they're alone, each defending their friend in an almost competitive way. Yes, thank you, Greg. You're kind of echoing what I said earlier. And I'll get more into this with my final comments, but that is one of the most charming things about this episode to me, just how, you said it perfectly, competitive they are and how they're just so in the corner of their friend. I absolutely love that quality in both of them and how it comes out so, kind of so forcefully in this episode. Greg goes on to say, George is completely neurotic as well, but also somehow a sloppy pig. But Cynthia also talks the entire time she's eating. So it's not like Cynthia, who I want to call Janice, is that much better. Well, but there's a difference. Yeah, she is kind of eating and talking. They all are. But yeah, George takes it to a much messier level. And there are degrees to which you can speak while eating. It definitely has to do with how much food is in your mouth at one time. And we saw that Cynthia really, takes small bites with little pieces of lettuce and a dab of and a pin drop's worth of dressing. So I can't really say that's equal. Greg goes on to say, I like how giddy Elaine and Jerry are about this fix-up and how they'll share all the details with each other. And yet they still don't share. I think it's bro code, sis code, and it's true to life. Right. Yeah, I do like how the loyalty to each of their friends kind of overtakes the full disclosure pact and it just falls apart right away. Well, and, we hear about the vault. We will keep hearing about it. But the vault, as we know, with these four, there's really no breaking it. Well, I guess we find out later with peach schnapps, you can break. That's the combination of Elaine's vault, but that's later, guys. We'll talk about it later. Next, Greg says, it's funny to me how Kramer's only input is bringing in the giant bag of condoms and how he tells Elaine to take half a bag. She replies, what am I, a hooker? Which is funny because later we see how insane she goes stockpiling today's sponges. Totally. It's a quality issue here, though, Greg. So, while she wants her sex, but she's not about to have sex with cheap-ass condoms. But the Today Sponge, she'll stockpile those till the cows come home, of course. But yeah, good parallel there. It just depends on the quality of the protection, not necessarily how much protection she should possess. All right, next, Greg says, my favorite Elaine moment is when she gets in the fight with Jerry and pushes him in the back. Then the finger in the face bit. She demonstrates yet again how great she is at physical comedy. I feel as though she can look at the script and deliver it at a range from, say, 1 to 10, and she's brilliant at figuring out the perfect number to be at for a scene. Some call for a 6 or an 8. When she's fighting with Jerry, it's a full 10 capped off with screaming, because she missed her period! I didn't mention, that's really fair, Greg. I mentioned a lot about her physicality, but I didn't mention the physical comedy of that fight scene. And I should have. You're completely right. That is some great physical comedy. I guess I was just I really don't love the whole fighting thing, but it is funny the way that they get into it. I remember also watching this. It's pretty obvious she's pregnant at this point. So I remember being nervous about what if accidentally during the flailing, her belly gets hit or something. I remember thinking that, but I'm sure that they had practiced it and choreographed it so that wouldn't happen. And yeah, I think we're on the same page here with talking about the level of physicality she brings. Because yes, to your point, if we're putting it on a range here from like 1 to 10, yeah, I mean the 10s, right, or the 6 and the 8s, it's more obvious. But what I also appreciate is when she even brings in like a 1 or a 2. And that's what I'm talking about, where it's like a little bit of like a shift in her hip maybe, or a little twist of the finger or wrist or something. She just always knows that perfect level. And yeah, it cannot be overstated how incredibly brilliant she is at all things physical. And lastly, Greg says, lastly, I want to say happy holidays to Shivani for doing such an awesome job with this podcast, and to all the JLD fans out there listening week to week. Aw, thanks, Greg. That's really nice. Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll take this moment as well. First of all, to Greg, I mean, thank you so much for being such a consistent contributor. Your thoughts are always so well thought out. And, you really put a lot of effort into it. And I so appreciate the fact that you make, the time to do that every week. And this podcast came out of a desire to do something creative and, something I felt a little bit of a need for. Look, I know there are like about 500 billion podcasts out there. So by no means am I trying to set the world on fire with Hot and Heavy, but, it was something that I was afraid to do for a while because I just wasn't sure if I could pull it off. And even though deep down I knew I could pull it off, but, you get those layers of fear that just keep burying all of your ambitions sometimes. And certainly I've given into that too much. But during the pandemic, I thought, Jesus, if I don't do it now, when the hell am I going to do it? And as a freelance artist, actor, writer, I need to keep my mind going, and I need to keep some kind of a creative outlet. And, if it's something I create, then I can, steer it, and I can produce it, and I can set the tone for it. So this has just been an amazing experience, a lot of growth, a lot of learning for me. I'm really proud of myself. It feels awkward to say, but I need to get more comfortable with saying that as well. And you all should too. Never ever sort of diminish the things you've accomplished. And if you don't do that, great. But I think a lot of us do. And you should just be proud of the things you've accomplished and the things you've overcome, because I know that for me, I sort of didn't give credence to a lot of the things that were pulling at me, the directions that were kind of the things that I always wanted to do. Didn't think that they were worthy, but I'm glad that I've gotten over that. No matter how late I feel like I've done it, never too late to do that. So thank you so much, Greg. That was really sweet. And if you would like to become a contributor, please contact me at elainepodcast@gmail.com. That's elainepodcast@gmail.com. And I haven't really gone over in a while what that entails. So you'll just be put on an email list, and I will alert you as to which episode I'm covering, when I will need notes by, and you can send in just an email of notes like Greg does every week, or a voice memo or some kind of an audio file to me, and I will play it on the podcast. Thank you so much to Greg again, and I hope that some of you out there will get in touch with me too, and we will make this podcast even better with your thoughts. So my favorite Elaine moments. It has to be the scene with Cynthia where she's telling her all about George. All that physicality, I can't keep saying that word over and over again, but I have to. The physicality and the dialogue is so well done. The commitment to every line of dialogue is something I admire so much about JLD. She puts like 110% in each line of dialogue. And within that scene, my ultimate favorite part is the pardon after Cynthia asks what George looks like. I think that's really well done because she's laughing about being a really, really funny guy. Pardon? Love it. And my final notes. I love this episode. It is so brilliantly written. It's so brilliantly acted. There are really long scenes in this episode, but not a moment is wasted, and I really appreciate that. And beyond the brilliant portrayal of how men and women approach dating in this episode, I love the display of the friendships here in different ways. So kind of elaborating on what Greg mentioned earlier, we see kind of the the depth of these friendships. And I'm talking about mostly the main four. Of course, there's Cynthia in this episode. She's got a very main role here in this A story, but specifically to our main four. So with Jerry and Elaine, they're in cahoots with the fix-up and enjoying that unique relationship and the power that they both feel. With Jerry and George, Jerry is fully in George's corner as someone who is good enough to date, hates how he's treated by Cynthia after, he doesn't get a phone call back and wants to call, in fact, and stick up for George. I mean, he just how mad he gets on George's behalf. And then he even picks a fight with Elaine because George is hurt, So it's just kind of the Jerry and George dynamic is really fleshed out here as well. Now, George and Elaine, sells George as honestly as she can to Cynthia and ultimately believes that the match could work after some initial trepidation, not about to start with George. And then she also learns how dedicated George would have been if he did get Cynthia pregnant. And you can see in that moment just like her being really pleasantly surprised about that. And the relationship of Kramer to all of them. He just wants to keep the peace. He didn't have a lot in this episode, but he's breaking up these fights. And while he's not correct in the assumptions that he's made about why each of those pairs are fighting, his words of advice are from the heart. Ultimately, he just wants all of his friends to be happy. So I thought that was really sweet. And especially for a series that, they set out to not show any hugging or learning. In this episode, they found ways to portray some deep friendships without anything too heartfelt. And that's pretty brilliant. And I think that's all I can say about The Fix-Up. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time.